Hello, everyone, and welcome back to CL 100. Um, Today, we're going to talk about Plato's Crito, and today's video is going to be shorter than the previous videos and the next videos as well, simply because, well, number one, Crito is quite short. You've now read it, and you've noticed it's a lot shorter than the Apology. But reason number two is it is very connected to the stuff we'll be discussing the next 2 weeks, right? So we're going to be talking about the social contract theory next. You see here Hobbes, Locke, Hume, and Rousseau. Um, and all these authors, especially Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, um, are when you talk about social contract theory, these are the three authors that come to mind, right? First, they are the most important authors discussing the topic. So we will talk about that in the coming videos, and that's strictly related to Crito. So we'll have ample chance to talk about this. But I wanted to start before I talk about the book itself, explaining why is it such an important book. Well, Plato contains the seeds of these um, works, okay, of Hobbes, Locke, Hume, and Rousseau. They would um, follow the lead of Plato, and especially this book is very important for political philosophy, social contract theory. Um, and I've talked about this idea before that all of these authors, right, are that political philosophy more generally is concerned with the relationship between state and individual behavior or morality and political order, right? Um, and this question of political authority is, in other words, the question of why is it morally acceptable or why is it justifiable? What makes it legitimate for the state to govern? Okay, whether it's the state or a single individual or a parliament, so whatever kind of political system you can think of, the whole question is why isn't it that we have anarchy instead, right? We could all take care of our own business, right? What is it that make it legitimate, okay, to yield part of a freedom um, to the state or to whatever, right? In the case of Machiavelli, it's the prince, right? So it could be the prince, the king, in the democracy, in the parliamentary system, you'll have different models of this, right? But essentially, um, that's the question that all these authors are looking at, and so was Plato. Okay, and Plato provided the first answer, the blueprint, if you wanted, to this issue of what makes it legitimate. So he's connected to all of these authors, but he's connected in particular to John Locke. And we'll talk about John Locke next week, of course. So see that even better. Now, Hobbes, just to introduce what is social contract theory, and also because we will not read Hobbes. It's a pretty big book, very tough for you to read it in a week, I assume. Whereas the other books that I've assigned you, they are not, it will take you a couple of days to read those books, or maybe 2 or 3 days. So it's I guess a couple of days. So it's feasible to read these books, right? The other ones. Um, Leviathan would be quite an enterprise, but I would just like very briefly summarize, especially because Hobbes was the first one to come up with this idea. I mean, Plato would have been kind of the forerunner, I'm arguing, right? But when we talk about social contract theory, again, we say Hobbes, we see the names of Hobbes, right? And Rousseau and Locke, not necessarily Plato, although he is in the prehistory of it, right? Again, as I mentioned, the dialogue we're reading, Crito, is so short that, he didn't develop the idea of a lot further. But Hobbes wrote the Leviathan, and in the Leviathan, there's this passage, this idea, right, that homo homini lupus est, which translates to a man is a wolf to another man, right? So to one another, right? So people are evil, essentially. People are selfish. People behave like wolves, and they will, eat each other in order to, in the quest for power, etc. Right? So that was Hobbes's idea that people are not virtuous or just, that ideal of Plato in the Republic, right? That we can become virtuous and just people learn the good life, etc. by education and etc. Um, Hobbes had a different notion, right, of human morality, that people are just trying to gain political power or accumulate wealth, etc. And, we're not altruistic or cooperating, right? And so, what is his argument? You see this, let's call it a prince or a king, right? So this would be Leviathan in the book, and it's supposed to represent the state, right? Although when he wrote this book in the 17th century, we didn't have democracies yet, so more commonly you had princes and kings. And I'm gonna zoom here. Do you see that his clothes? You can see this is the cover of the book, so you can obviously Google Leviathan and you'll see. But I think you can see quite clearly here. It's people. You see a bunch of people. So he's wearing an armor shield, which is made of people, constituted of people. So in a sense, the state, right, or that person in charge, the king, the prince, whatever you want to think about it. Again, as I said, it could be a dictator, it could be a parliament, it could be a president, it depends, right? But the political authority, the central authority, whatever it is, right? It's, essentially um, given authority by the people. So in order for people to not kill each other, since we are wolves essentially, we understand and realize, okay, as a society, we did that, over history, basically, and we created governments and states, or we had kings and princes, etc. We had different historical process all around the world, of course, but essentially, the abstract idea here is that the social contract, okay, is a contract that we've signed. We didn't really sign that, but it's just a model, right? An idea of, so you can understand what are the advantages of having that political authority and where does its legitimacy come from, right? So it's as if we had signed the social contract, all of us, right? Society, where we gave up part of our liberty to the state or to the political authority because we recognize that essentially it's better for us, right? At the end of the day, the idea is you need the police, you need certain laws, you need certain protections from the state, you need property rights, right? You may be almost anywhere in the political spectrum, and it doesn't matter here. I'm not making an argument of big state or small state. You can be, if you're a Republican, Democrat, socialist, pro-market, it doesn't matter, right? I am sure you will agree, even if you think that the state should be minimal and the market the market is far superior to the state, usually you'll still agree that there should be property rights, isn't it? That is a law that protects property because otherwise people will, right? I mean, thieves could just, or burglars could just come and take away your property, take your profits away. So you're going to want some protection, police, right? These kinds of laws. Um, okay, you're also going to want an army, probably, right? National defense, isn't it? There are certain things that the state has to do, even if you're anti-state by nature, right? So I'm not talking about anything specific, right? Not healthcare, these things. I'm just talking about the very minimal, the public institutions that allow markets to exist, even, isn't it? Okay, if you want free markets, right, you're also going to need certain things by certain protections for the market to operate right freely and for people to be able to do business safely. So Hobbes inaugurated this idea, right, of us yielding our power to the sovereign. And then, the other ones, Locke and Rousseau, we'll talk about them more specifically later, but they follow on these steps. Okay, now, what about Crito? That's what we're supposed to be talking about, right? Um, and I mean, we are because I'm just explaining that all of these other ideas that are part of what we're discussing in this course are already to some extent here in Crito, right? So you had to know what social contract theory is at least a little bit, so you can understand this a bit more in context. All right, now what is Crito about? Um, briefly, it's a dialogue, as all of the other dialogues, which took place after the apology, right? So you had the trial of Socrates. We discussed that last time. And Socrates was condemned to jail and to drink the hemlock, right? The poison, condemned to that. Um, and during that period, while he was waiting for his death penalty, his friend Crito, this other guy here on the right hand side, visit him in jail and told him basically you can escape. It's very easy. Okay, it's not as easy as the picture suggests, I guess, but I generated this image, and it looked like it represents quite well what's happening. Which it's not literally like the door is open, but it's essentially what Crito is saying. Like there's a boat there waiting for us, a small boat waiting for us on the dock, and like the guards aren't watching. It's all right. It's all under control. Like nothing is going to happen. Besides, anyway, I mean, Socrates was condemned to death, right? So it's not like he's going to risk anything if he wanted to escape. I mean, but that's essentially it. So Crito offers him the possibility to escape and go to an island, live there forever, right? And obviously, you remember from last time Socrates, saying that from the last book, if you when you read the Apology, you remember Socrates saying that he wasn't afraid of dying, right? That his whole life was dedicated to living this just life and virtuous life, etc. Um, and right here, obviously, it's one thing to say that, but then once you're actually condemned to death, maybe you do feel scared. I would assume when the moment comes, and if you do have the opportunity to escape in a boat, do you want to be coherent with what you said a few days ago and with your notions of morality, or do you escape and save your life when you know that the trial was unfair? I mean, from your perspective, right? From Socrates' perspective, it was not fair, the trial, right? I've argued last time that it depends who you're asking, right? From the population point of view, maybe it was fair. They thought it was fair to condemn him because they were scared of impiety and the consequence of God's, flooding the city, etc., of him corrupting the youth and having like political turmoil, etc., etc. So, but from Socrates' perspective, he is an, a good person that is only asking questions and trying to understand where morality comes from. He's not doing anything evil per se, right? Um, all right, so what do you do, right? Um, Crito is not only in the prehistory or the seeds of social contract theory, but more generally, it is considered by some the first text in political philosophy writ large. Um, and in Crito, as I argued, he's asking this question about whether or not you should respect the law or not, right? He has the clear possibility of just breaking away from it. And yet he doesn't. Just one brief comment. We saw this picture last time. You see Socrates here about to take the hemlock. And one thing I didn't mention is that is interesting here is you see Socrates essentially being very brave and not afraid of death, right? As he said during the trial, seems a very, let me zoom a little bit. He doesn't seem like super afraid that he's about to take the poison, right? Everyone else is crying and super sad. Uh, but Socrates basically said, hey, listen up. We still have a little bit of time to talk about what justice is and what virtue means. So let's just use these last hours and less days and less up to the very last minute, right? So here that's what the picture was depicting, that I didn't mention, that Socrates up to the minute, he's not even looking as he grabs the hemlock, right? He's just gonna drink it and probably continue talking about virtue. Like, oh, what if justice, blah, 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 right? So here, um, um, yeah, I just wanted to say that because I didn't mention that last time. So should we respect the laws? Why should we respect the laws, etc.? Right? And his answer essentially is gonna be that breaking the laws is always wrong, even if it's unjust or if the law is wrong, right? He says, I consented to live in Athens, so I consented to the state. That is Hobbes's idea that I was talking about, that social contract, right? That you consent to the authority of the state, and you don't do that explicitly because you're simply born in the US or wherever you were born, and you were born into a country and into a constitution, right? There was never a day where you said, oh, I accept the laws of the US, or I do not accept it. I do not accept them. But you do that tacitly. Okay, that's going to be part of John Locke's argument as well. Um, that you accept the laws tacitly because you could simply migrate. It's not that simple, obviously. Maybe you can't migrate, but that's the argument that Socrates is making and that Locke will make as well, right? That so, in other words, if you do not accept the laws, if you think they are not reasonable, you could move to another country where laws are more democratic or more favorable or whatever, right? So basically, it's not that simple. I've said it again in practice, right? But Socrates is saying there to Crito, I could move, right? I could have moved to another city here in Athens, and I didn't. So now I have responsibility to the city, and that would be a contradiction. So I'm not going to do it, right? And so, in answering to that question, to where does political authority stem from, what makes the state legitimate, Socrates answers very similarly to Locke that if you're a citizen, you're responsible, right, for certain things. You've consented to the laws of the country, and you could have moved to a different place if you wanted, right? So you have a moral obligation to the state, and that is poetically why Crito is, the father of political philosophy, because whether philosophy examines several questions, right, related to, there could be more, there are different parts of philosophy as well, right? But when if you're not a philosopher, then probably the first thing you think when you think of philosophy are these existential questions, right? What does it mean to exist? And what is the nature of reality? And um, right, to be or not to be, that's obviously Shakespeare, but that sounds like a bit of a philosophical question, right? These broad questions about life and the meaning of things and reality, etc. That's part of philosophy, of course. But political philosophy, right? When you add that word political to philosophy, then obviously um, it's not those broader questions first only, right? You may ask certain questions as well, but as so you may ask some of these questions, but only as they relate to, right, political structure and the institutions, the laws of the country, right? So he's talking here about why you have to respect the laws and accept them, even if they were wrong. So here's the extreme case because he's going to die, and he's saying even then, right? Um, okay. So basically, you have this moral obligation because you benefit from the country also, right? You did benefit at some point from certain advantages of living there. So now that you're supposed to pay the cost, let's assume that, think about a less extreme case, not death penalty, but you have to pay a fee or something, right? A ticket fee. So you shouldn't break the law there, right? What, how is it then you had benefits when the state helped you with whatever it did, and that it helped you, and now that the country helped you with whatever it did, right? And now that you have to pay the cost, you're not accepting that. So, it seems like you only um, you get all the benefits, but you don't pay the cost when you have to, isn't it? Um, Okay, so what is very intriguing here in the way the dialogue proceeds is that Socrates dialogues not only with Crito, but also with the laws. He talks directly with the laws. Okay, so here he's telling Crito here, what would the law tell him, right? If he did that, he said, okay, Crito, listen, if I did escape, like you're saying, what do you think the law would say? The law would say something like this. And was that our agreement with you? The law would answer. Or were you to abide by the sentence of the state? And if I were to express my astonishment with the words, the law would probably end. Answer, Socrates, what complaint have you to make against us to justify you in attempting to destroy us and the state, right? So you want to destroy the state, the law. The law is Socrates um, is in this interesting position of dialoguing now with the laws and the state itself, right? And now for the first time, he's the one who is being convinced of something, right? Instead of finding holes and proving people wrong like he did in the Republic, here it's the opposite, right? It's the law that is putting Socrates in his place, and the law is arguing and convincing the law is convincing Socrates that Socrates should not break the law. This is what's happening, right? Um, okay, move. It goes on. The law would say, in the first place, didn't we bring you into existence? Your father married your mother by our aid and begat you. So they were your father and your mother when they married. They used whatever it was the church, and then they had to go to public offices to sign contracts, etc. So they only could marry because the state married them, right? Partially the state and the church, but the church is also in part of the country, the city, right? So public institutions, as it were. So the law would go on. Say whether you have any objection to urge against those of us who regulate marriage. None, I should reply, Socrates would say. Uh, the law continues, or against those of us who after birth regulate the nurture and education of children, in which you also were trained. So the laws, the state, right? The city of Athens telling Socrates, we nurtured you, we educated you, right? You and all children. So if there's public education, if there, right, whatever it is, there might be, again, as I said, it could be a very small state, a very big state. So the state may have to provide more or less of these things, nurture, education, etc. But at the very minimum, it is the state that regulates and that creates laws that, the marriage itself, right? That's part of the Constitution itself. So it's the state who that whether you like it or not, the state was an essential part of your upbringing in one way or the other, right? And now you want to come and destroy the state because basically that's what you're doing by running away and not respecting the law, right? That's the and Socrates obviously here is saying, yes, you're right, right? I think when he says none, I should reply. He's saying I don't have any objections to what you're saying, right? He's agreeing with the law. The law goes on. Were not the laws which have the charge of education right in commanding your father to train you in music and gymnastic? Right, I should reply. Well, then, since you were brought into the world and nurtured and educated by us, can you deny in the first place that you are our child and slave, and as your fathers were before you? And if this is true, you are not on equal terms with us, nor can you think that you have a right to do to us what we are doing to you. So we are not on an equal footing here. It's as if this the law, the Constitution, it has there's a hierarchy, right? The Constitution is up there, and Socrates and all of us should keep it. Um, Not just the Constitution, but the country, the respect for the country. This is this statement of Socrates here would make any nationalist uh, very, very proud, wouldn't it? I mean, there's a very even extreme, a bit extreme, I think, because I mean, slave. I'm not sure the word usage here is slave. You know that again, written in 400 BC in Greek, so it might be that the connotation is not exactly that of slave. Okay. I'll give you an example. In Hebrew, in the Old Testament, the same word for slave is used for the slaves in Egypt, for slaves as we conceive of them, and for when you are a servant to God, when you're obedient to God, you are a slave to God, right? It's the same word. But it's not a bad thing in that context, right? In the Old Testament to be a slave to God. It just means that you obey God, surrender God, right? In that sense. But it's the same word, and they have very it's the same word, but they mean different things. So maybe slave here is more like that you owe obedience and respect to and etc. Not in a pejorative way, I would argue. But I said it's a bit extreme, not only because of that, but I mean, I don't know if the state is more important than everything, than your parents, than your mother. It's nothing matters. The state is the only thing that matters. The laws, right? But the laws here are basically the state and the um I mean the laws, if you don't have the state, you don't have the laws, right? And you don't have the state, you don't have the police, so you don't have law enforcement. So these three things are essentially strictly connected. Um, all right. Would you have any right to strike or revile or to do any other evil to your father or your master if you have received evil at his hands? The laws ask. Um, and because we think right to destroy you, do you think that you have any right to destroy us in return? Has a philosopher like you failed to discover that our country is more to be valued and higher and holier far than mother and father or any ancestor, and more to be regarded in the eyes of the gods and of men of understanding? All right, so um, essentially So here, in that image, you have the United States here in the corner. So not only the laws, right, the Constitution, but the country, right? You have here the whole world because I couldn't generate just a country, but you have Europe here in the US here. So your country, the United States, and the laws are more valued, right, than your mother, and they're holier than your mother and father, and then everything else, etc. But you can see here, right, why Socrates clearly has a claim for the father of political philosophy, right? The role of the state, the importance of laws, and why there's legitimacy to the state, and why we should respect the laws. Okay, so how does this end? Um, well, he accepts the sentence and takes the hemlock, right? You knew that, right? But I mean, I would just argue that I talked about that a little bit last time. That yes, that's the end of the book, of the story, right, of the dialogue and of Socrates' life as well. But that's the beginning of philosophy to some extent, right? Not that he was the absolute first, but um, certainly when he is definitely one of the most important people in developing not only political philosophy, but philosophy more generally. All right, that's about it. And yeah, see ya.